So as of the beginning of 2022, the MCU is still one of the most successful franchises, and there are franchises in this franchise, so I'm going to rank all 7 MCU franchises from the worst to the best in my opinion. And this is my list. Hi, my name is Nathan, and I talk about a bunch of movies, film, TV, and just anything on the screen, film in general. Be sure down below in the comment section to share your ranking of the 7 MCU franchises. Also, be sure to check out my channel. I have more content like this. And if you enjoyed this video, click that like button. And be sure to subscribe. And like I said, there's more content like this over on my channel. And with that said, let's begin the ranking of the 7 MCU franchises in this big franchise. Coming in last place is the Thor franchise. Now, this is a franchise that I don't hate. I don't necessarily, hate on it. I don't have a lot of criticisms about this franchise, but I think this is a franchise that's horribly inconsistent throughout each films. Let me start off by saying I think Thor Ragnarok is easily the strongest of the 3 films. Like, Thor Ragnarok, it just had so much energy. Taika Waititi added some alcohol and many colors into the Thor franchise and revived it with Thor Ragnarok. That one was easily the best. The other 2, the first 2 Thor films, however, I think are some of the weakest films inside of the entire MCU. The original Thor is a film that I enjoy, but I feel is weak because it's tonally inconsistent throughout the film. On Asgard, Kenneth Branagh adds this sense of grandeur into the mix, but then when you go to Earth, it turns into Looney Tunes, fish out of water humor, including Thor being slapsticky, like he's getting run over by a car twice, which sounds like something that would be in the movie Free Guy, because it is in the movie Free Guy. And then you move on to Thor the Dark World, widely considered to be one of the weakest MCU movies. So this is a franchise that, while I enjoy Ragnarok, those first 2 Thor movies don't really hit that strong MCU mark, so easily my least favorite of the franchises is the Thor franchise. Coming in at number 6 is the Iron Man franchise. This is actually a pretty frustrating one for me because the Iron Man franchise is a franchise that has one of the best characters in the MCU, probably my favorite character inside of the MCU, and I love that he got his own franchise, a trilogy of films. To be clear, I think the original Iron Man is actually one of the best films inside of the MCU, still one of my favorites, and because it doesn't have all the weight of all these plot lines on his shoulders and is the first film in the MCU, it could just tell this nice little origin story about this billionaire in a cave building a suit. But then, much like Thor, the other 2 Iron Man films, one is actually pretty bad, and the other is a mid-tier MCU film. So one's very high, one's mid-tier, and one's at the bottom. The one at the bottom would be Iron Man 2, which I think is a very flawed film. Tony Stark doesn't act like himself. He literally pees his suit at one point in this film. And Whiplash was totally wasted. There's barely any action in the film. It's just, I didn't think it was all that good. And then Iron Man 3 is a film that, yeah, I think it's good to me. It's right in that middle tier MCU for me. But it's a film that seems inconsequential to the MCU because none of the plot lines are continued, as a plotline about Iron Man just being Tony Stark is abandoned once you get to Age of Ultron. So it feels inconsequential. Where I would agree with some people is the Mandarin twist, which didn't really make much sense as to why they would do that. So the original Iron Man is a top tier, Iron Man 2 is a bottom tier, and Iron Man is in the mid tier. So this is a very frustrating one for me because this franchise is all over the place. Coming in at number 5 is Ant-Man. Now, this is a franchise that's not trying to be the biggest, the boldest, and the loudest franchise in the MCU. It's trying to be a small scale story. The first film, I enjoy the first film a little bit more than I enjoy the second film, but I think both films are actually quite good. Even movies like Ant-Man and the Wasp, which are actually pretty low on my MCU list, I still give a positive review. I still enjoy, I still find entirely watchable. So, even at this franchise's worst, it's not like bottom tier like Thor and Iron Man is. It's just like a simple story. The first film started off as a heist film, and I normally enjoy that type of thing. Paul Rudd, the actor that I never knew I wanted him to play a Marvel superhero before, and it's just a film that is a lot of fun, as even in the final battle, you get this Thomas the Train Engine toy set battle, which is a bit of fun to see. Then we move on to Ant-Man and the Wasp, which, yet again, much like Iron Man 3, can feel inconsequential to the MCU, besides that awesome mid-credit scene. But it can feel inconsequential to the MCU, but it's still a fun adventure after the dark take on Infinity War. I appreciate that they were trying to do something lighthearted and just something very simple, so I really enjoy both of these films. They're not trying to be the biggest and the boldest, like I said, and they're small scale, but it does exactly what it was going for, and it did the stuff that I would expect and enjoy from the Ant-Man franchise. Coming in at number 4 is the Spider-Man franchise, and this one is heartbreaking to me because Spider-Man No Way Home just came out, and I absolutely loved that movie. Like, I could not believe they pulled it off with all these multiverse characters inside of this of Spider-Man No Way Home, and it's just awesome. Like, the audience was like cheering and clapping so much in the theater. That's not really something that happens often in the theater. So that was just a lot of fun to see the audience freak out once all the familiar faces started showing up. We'll start off with Spider-Man Homecoming, which I think is a very solid MCU movie, actually. It's still my top 10 MCU movies, I think, at least. And I just thought that it's one of those MCU movies that's, much like Ant-Man and the Wasp, it doesn't have the biggest, it's not trying to be the biggest and boldest, it's just trying to be a simple story about Vulture and Spider-Man clashing it out because Vulture is selling dangerous weapons. And Vulture himself, one of the best villains in the MCU, is he's so compelling, and he's not really a villain. He's just trying to do this for his family. I thought that was a nice little touch in this film. And once again, Tom Holland, you get the perspective in the MCU from a high schooler, and that was just very interesting to see to me. Then, I know this is unpopular opinion, but you move on to Spider-Man Far From Home, and I did not like Spider-Man Far From Home. It might be the most unpopular opinion on this channel right now, but I just thought the plotting, the storytelling, for whatever reason, it was just so clunky to me. When I first saw it in the theater, I actually really enjoyed it, but on rewatch when I got it on Blu-ray, it didn't work all that well to me. Part of that is because the main plot line of the film involves Tony Stark, the billionaire genius, giving dangerous Edith glasses to a high schooler without instructions, and that just kind of bugged me a bit, so that didn't really sit right with me, and it explains very clearly that Peter Parker wasn't the right person to do this. He almost kills everybody on the bus, and he gives them to Mysterio, a superhero that he's barely met, he's just met the day before. I mean, that just didn't sit right to me. And then you move on to Spider-Man No Way Home, and that is just an awesome film with awesome fan service, and it's just a great film in the MCU. One of my top 5 MCU movies is Spider-Man No Way Home, and I just love it. So it breaks my heart that a film with Spider-Man No Way Home in it, with all familiar faces and everything, appears so low on an MCU ranking. It's just right in the middle. It's heartbreaking for me, but because of Spider-Man Far From Home, it kind of ruined its chances at being higher on this list. Kicking off our top 3 is Captain America. Now, this is a trilogy that is very consistent within the MCU. Unlike Thor and Iron Man, this is a trilogy that feels like a trilogy of films completing Captain America's story. As you start off in Captain America the First Avenger, where it's about Steve Rogers' origin story, and he's just this whiny kid. He's basically like a kid, but he may be not strong, but he wants to do the right thing in deep down in his heart. And when he becomes a super soldier, he never tries to kill anybody. When he is a superhero, he does knock out people, he does punch them in the face and stuff, but he never wants to kill anybody. So that in and of itself is very compelling in this case. Then you move on to Captain America the Winter Soldier. One of the best MCU movies, one of my top 10 MCU movies to date, and I think that The Winter Soldier, just an epic film where, once again, you follow Captain America on this journey where he's actually trying to get his friend Bucky back, and it feels like the correct continuation of the first Avenger. So that's what I like about this film. And you move on to Civil War, or better preferred, Avengers 2.5. and he's clashing it out with a friend because they have different worldviews. Not because they hate each other or anything like that. It's because their worldviews are different, and Captain America himself decides to give up the shield at the end. There's just something very compelling about the way he's characterized as well. Like, when he wants to attack people, he doesn't want to actually kill anybody. So there's something very compelling about him in this trilogy of films. And all the characters stand out and pop. You have this trilogy of films that's just very consistent, unlike Thor and Iron Man. Therefore, it is very high on this list. Our runner-up is the Guardians of the Galaxy duology. Now, this is a franchise that only has 2 films, but those 2 films are absolutely awesome. The original Guardians of the Galaxy is a great film, and it's just wildly entertaining. James Gunn just did a great job with the original Guardians of the Galaxy, and probably one of the most rewatchable MCU movies of all time. It has one of the best soundtracks of all time, and it's actually very high on my MCU list. It's a fan favorite of the MCU to me, and it can be very heartfelt because it is James Gunn. So that's just a great film to me. And then when you move on to Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, which I don't think is nearly as strong as the original, but I still really enjoy Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 as it deals with themes about finding family inside of biology. And so that was a fun little bit in this film. And it's just that what I criticize about it is because each act, it seems to have a different villain. As the first act is the Sovereign, then Taserface, then Ego. That kind of bugged me about the film, but I still really enjoy it. I still watch it a lot, and so this is a franchise to me that whenever I watched it when I was 7 years old, whenever I watched the original, I absolutely loved it, even though I didn't know who the Guardians of the Galaxy actually were. But I think that this is a franchise that, even though you don't know who the characters are when you first watch it, it just tells this space adventure inside the MCU, and that's what I love about it. All their performances are great. It has a great cast as well, and each character pops. So this is a franchise that I just absolutely love. But in first place is Avengers. Now, to me, these are the 4 films in the franchise that are films that they are the best team-up films in the MCU. Or at least in specific, Avengers 1, 3, and 4, and then Age of Ultron. Tries to just hit a solid double. But I still really enjoy Age of Ultron. You start off with the Avengers, where they try to think up, how do you take all these different franchises that have already been established in the MCU and put them into this one movie? And they pulled it off. They made it work. Even stuff that shouldn't work, like Hulk punching Thor for fun, and then Hulk battering Loki on the floor. That stuff shouldn't work, but for whatever reason, it's the goofy Avengers movie that has the goofy jokes, and it's very fun to watch this film. Move on to Age of Ultron, which I think is the weakest of the 4, obviously, and I still think it's a very good film that, basically I think Ultron is actually one of the best villains in the MCU. Some would disagree, because he does sing Pinocchio at one point, but I think that he's just a very cool AI robot. So, and the action in this film is bigger than ever. In Age of Ultron is actually very big, and it has urgent stakes. So I just really enjoyed this film as well. Obviously the weakest, but still enjoyed this film. Then you move on to Infinity War, which upped the stakes by a whole lot. Adding the Guardians of the Galaxy into the mix just adds a nice little dynamic. What made it stand out was Thanos, the villain of the entire Infinity Saga, and it's just that was awesome to me. And when he snaps his fingers and the heroes died, and I saw it in the theater, I'm just like, really? That's how the movie's gonna end? I can't wait to see Infinity War Part 2. That's exactly how I reacted to Infinity War. I thought it was a complete story, and it is one of my favorite films in the MCU. And then you move on to Endgame. Just a great movie, the biggest film that I think we've gotten in the MCU, and there are not many movies like that. like, it's probably, like, you could only see it in a few movies, but it's just there are not many movies like that. People are clapping at the end. Like, it's probably the most emotional film in the MCU, as, like, even some people were crying when Iron Man made that final sacrifice. And the last hour of the film is just non-stop payoff for over 10 years of waiting. That was the correct conclusion to this franchise. So when it comes to the MCU franchises and their completed stories and their completed character arcs and everything, easily in first place is the Avengers. So there you have it. Those are the 7 MCU franchises ranked to me. Down below in the comment section, share your ranking of all 7 MCU franchises as of now. If you enjoyed this video, click that like button and be sure to subscribe. I have more content rankings like this over on my channel. You could check that out right now. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.